Welcome back. Thank you. We are back to schedule, which I'm happy to say, and we are starting our next panel with our second annual Industry Circle Town Hall. We started this program last year to acknowledge those leaders in the games for change sector who have developed sustainable business models or act as inspiration to a lot of game developers moving into this space and have grown to be leaders in our sector. Today we're going to have Mark DeLoura, former senior advisor for digital media at the White House Office of Science, Technology and Policy, as our moderator. And with him, we are joined by Scott Price, product director of BrainPop, Jesse Schell, CEO of Schell Games, Margaret Wallace, CEO of Playmatics, and Dan White, CEO of Filament Games. So welcome, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, we're all, I think we're all a little punchy, so this will be a fun panel. Hi, I'm Mark DeLoura. Thank you for being here. We've got a great group of people today. Our fantastic industry circle. You probably know all of these people. If not, there was a great slide a minute ago. But we're going to take some time today and have a conversation about their businesses, and I'll ask some questions and give you time to ask some questions. But first off, we're going to let them each introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their companies. So first, let's go to Dan. And Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Games for Change Industry Circle?
I'd be delighted to, Mark. So the Games for Change Industry Circle is currently comprised of the fine folks that you see on the stage in front of you. And the thing that well, among other things, one thing that we all have in common is that we are all dedicated to making our livings in the field of games for change. And we do this obviously because we believe in the power of games to have a positive impact on the world, but also because we're absolutely crazy. As you all know, making games is very challenging, right? And, well, that's bright. I say the wrong thing. Making games is very challenging. Making change, any kind of impact, whether you're using games as your vehicle or not, is very challenging. But most importantly of all, actually making a sustainable revenue and sustaining a company is very challenging in the games for change space. And yet the thing that all of these organizations have in common is that yet somehow they have defied the odds and persisted across time and had staying power. I think every one of our organizations has been around for at least 10 years, right, if not more. So it's an incredible opportunity at this point to give back to the Games for Change community, and that's what the Industry Circle is all about. Collectively, we represent dozens of years of experience making games and otherwise serving the Games for Change space. And this is an opportunity for us to try to elevate the sector. So the last thing I'll say is just that in addition to this being a fantastic time to be in the Games for Change space, this is a fantastic time to consider joining this fine group of people in the Industry Circle for next year. So if you are an organization that makes games and is considering making games, consider how you could contribute to the industry for Games for Change by joining the circle here and trying to elevate the sector. Part of our responsibility as a group of people is to try to make impact through games, but part of it is also to try to elevate the sector and to try to advance the sector. So that means serving the market needs that exist right now, but it can also mean dreaming big and pushing the envelope and experimenting with new technologies like VR and augmented reality, et cetera. And of course, recruiting others into our fold, because the more of us there are trying to make games for change, the better for the industry, absolutely. And of course, we'll feel less crazy the more of us that there are. So without further ado, as Mark said, we've got an opportunity to share some of our experience. We're going to talk a little bit about experiences that we've had over the past couple years, and then what we're looking forward to in the future in the Games for Change space.
Thanks, Dan. So first off, let's go to Scott.
I didn't know you were actually going to put that biopic up there.
Sorry.
So I'm Scott Price. I'm director of product with BrainPop. I've been in the game industry about as long as Games for Change has been around. I started out in entertainment games with a background in education. And then first chance I got, I moved over and started working with games for the classroom and for educational contexts. I'm here on behalf of BrainPop. BrainPop was started in 1999, founded by Dr. Avraham Kadar, a pediatrician and immunologist, to make short videos explaining to his patients what was going on in their bodies, figuring that if they could see it, they would understand and it would help their treatment. 17 years later, we've got over 800 videos and supporting materials and features that let kids play and make around what they're learning. And then about 8 years ago, we started Game Up because for two reasons. We had educators on our staff who had both seen amazing games like at Games for Change and were frustrated that they had not known until they were lucky enough to go to Games for Change that those games were out there. And they wanted to know them, and they wanted to see them get out there. And then from the other side, we knew these developers who were making amazing games that either because of the project that they were part of, they didn't have a business plan, or there was no clear way for them to go to market, or even to get out and get distribution. So we started Game Up to get some of those games out into the world. And now, a few years later, we've got over 106 games, I believe, from over 43 partners. That includes museums, nonprofits, a whole lot of the folks here. And it's going very well. Last year we had 2.2, last school year we had 2.2 million hours of kids play and learning in that. And if you do the math on that, that's about, I think, 250 years. Hopefully that wasn't all the same group of kids. But it speaks that these games, when we carefully select the right games and get them out there, kids will play them. We know they're learning because we've picked very carefully. We probably look at about 100 games for every one or two that we get. And we've internally developed only 5 of those. The next one. We've learned a few things over the few years of Game Up. I have to keep craning around, sorry. So one big thing is that since we have such a strong grounding in the classroom and in schools, one big thing is that when games are getting played in the classroom, they're part of a larger context that isn't just a kid and a device in a game. Games are played with other people in competition or collaboration. They're usually mediated by a teacher. The audience may be a captive audience, or maybe not. And games will come and go from the classroom, and if they're really good, kids will start playing them in one context and move to another. So designing for that is one thing that we've learned. There's some tricks of that maybe will come up in the questions. Another big one is skill versus content. This is often framed as an either-or. People want games to cover content. Can we test kids afterwards and will they have learned this? While the best games are often made around a skill, but practicing that skill in the context and content of a certain area. So what does it mean to be able to read from context clues in science to learn science vocabulary rather than drilling on science vocabulary? A bit of advice, consider privacy and concerns and designing for assessment and whatnot from the very beginning of your game. We've seen a lot of projects that we get excited about because we see them in finished form. And then we talk to the developer about what it's going to mean for them to be used in a school that has Byzantine and untested in the courts regulations around privacy, or just how are they going to get all of the kids in front of that in the right time. I'm going to skip the next one because I think other folks on the panel are going to be able to speak to this better. I'll leave it just that distribution and monetization is complex and difficult. Good luck with that. And, well, on the other side, however, collaborate to solve problems like that. Some of our best projects have been ones where we've been able to bring our experience as distributors and designers and work with folks who are content matter experts and actually test things in schools with kids. And so those sorts of collaborations almost inevitably lead to the best games, including So one of the things that we're excited about now are actually launching this on Monday, beta of a game that I believe Karina Lynch announced last year in this panel, a game called The Meaning of Beep, where we've worked with the Institute of Play on digitizing a game that they worked with the Quest to Learn school on. So this was a game that was workshopped and built on paper in a classroom for several years, iterated on, and then we worked with the Institute of Play to redesign that digitally, bring it all of the cool things that you could do in multiplayer and digital and secret information and then get it out in front of hundreds of thousands of teachers. So that's what I'm excited about. Hopefully you might get to play this come Monday. But more generally, what that speaks to is both those kind of collaborations and also thinking about, as we've turned this game into a digital game, thinking about the larger play in the classroom and how it can be mediated or not by a teacher or not.
That's great. Thanks, Scott. Let me ask the audience a question before we transition to the next person. So this is the interactive portion of the session, not really. So how many of you are currently building games for change? Just stick your hand up in the air. Awesome. How many of you, your company's been doing it for more than 2 years? 5 years? 10 years? Wow, nice crowd. Okay, awesome. It's a good calibration for us for our conversation. All right, let's move along. Margaret.
Oh, hey there. Hi, everybody. My name's Margaret Wallace. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Playmatics, also known, thank you, hey, also known in the game industry as That Lady CEO. And Playmatics has been around since 2009. And we're headquartered here in New York City. Specifically, we're institutional partners at the Made in New York Media Center in Dumbo. And I also spend a lot of my time in Silicon Valley, and specifically in San Francisco, which is Silicon Valley extended these days. And so we have been very fortunate since our establishment in 2009 to have been involved with many awesome partners ranging from Disney Imagineering, the American Museum of Natural History, Scripps Research Institute, Viacom, I mean, the Red Bull. So it's been an interesting time for Playmatics. You can advance if you want ahead. Because we've managed to really have a diversity of partnerships and a diversity of games and digital IP and real-world IP that we put out. So Playmatics, we ebb and flow in terms of size depending on what we're working on. We're not a purely work-for-hire organization, which is a nice differentiator for us. We're very entrepreneurially minded. We are full service, so we work in product development, design, monetization, and also research and grant writing. And increasingly, we're also often called upon when commercialization questions come up because, as it was noted, it's a very complicated world. And so we're right at this point in my talk, I'm supposed to talk about how things have changed and how we've evolved as a company. My background in the game industry, and I've been in the game industry, I'm almost embarrassed to say, since 1996. I came from a purely entertainment background, although I do have an academic background in research and stuff like that. But I worked on virtual pets. I've worked, so the first ever virtual pets. I've worked on the publisher side. I've worked at large media companies, working with the BBC and with Lifetime Television. And up until about 5 years ago, I would say that Games for Change, while interesting, wasn't nearly as compelling for me personally and professionally as the entertainment industry was. But then, over the years, we saw things happen like a closed app store ecosystem where people are paying upwards of $5, $10, $15, $25 a user. I saw a shift in the casual game industry, which is where I specifically focused a lot, from pure entertainment to things that kind of verge on gambling and, you know, with a lot of the free-to-play business models. And while we still make free-to-play games, in fact, we're making a free-to-play game right now, which is part of a phase 2 NIH grant, which will be entering clinical trials in September. I felt really unfulfilled as a game industry executive and as a startup founder. So my co-founder, Nick Fortuno, and I spent a lot of time diversifying and talking to everybody that we could find to speak with and have conversations with. And I think that's what allowed Playmatics to have a strong foothold still in entertainment and in transmedia and in working with filmmakers and documentary filmmakers, but also working with financial institutions and research institutions and education providers and schools to deliver what we learned from the world of entertainment to more, I would say, lofty and altruistic products and goals. And so I would say that's the biggest change. We've also had to diversify and be very smart about how we commercialize our products and how we structure deals. I think the most important thing that any of us in the room as content creators can do is understand what our leverage is as content creators and not allow ourselves, to whatever extent we can, I know sometimes you have to corner ourselves in with deals that limit our ability to really, shine as founders, entrepreneurs, and content creators. And I would say that's a huge thing to kind of keep in mind. Moving forward for the future, we feel very fortunate. We've seen a lot of New York game companies come and go, especially ones that were around for a really long time. It's heartbreaking. And why does that happen? It's because the economics, the industry have shifted, and a lot of times it's the content creators that get squeezed in the end. And so it really takes some luck, skill, timing, and I would say diversification to make sure that doesn't happen. So for the long game, we're going to continue to expand on what we've been doing. We just made a pretty big announcement yesterday or the day before in VentureBeat, a partnership with the Scripps Research Institute. It's namely an online games portal called Science Game Lab. Everybody can go there right now to sign up. And if you're familiar with game websites such as Congregate.com or Miniclip, think about Science Game Lab as an online portal that is a central location for citizen science games. So not just educational games, which are awesome and important in and of themselves, but games that drive and contribute directly to crowdsourced research that aids in scientific exploration. And I am personally committed and excited about that. We're building open source APIs. So anyone in this audience right now, if you have a game that is focused around citizen science, you can integrate your game into our site. We will have a full suite of tools for you to customize user achievements and rankings and a central user profile. And eventually, we really see this growing even more as a central hub for promoting citizen science and hopefully some of your games as well. So I just want to say it's really great to be on this panel with everybody and to sort of meet all of you out there. And I think the most important thing for all of us to do to stay in it for the long game is to just know the value we all bring to the table as content creators and to really take advantage of what those opportunities are in terms of not only getting paid for doing the work, but controlling that IP to whatever extent you can and being able to exploit that IP, as they say in the legal world, to get it in as many channels and to make sure you get the credit for that as well. And I really wish you all the best.
That's pretty awesome. Thank you, Margaret. I wonder, Margaret, I realize one thing about your slides is that I know you've been in the industry for a long time, but I'm not sure you haven't listed any of the games that you've worked on your slides. I wonder if you could share some of your work.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So Playmatics has, apart from the commercial products, we recently partnered with the filmmaker David Cronenberg to create an online sort of ARG type experience called Body Mind Change. We are I mentioned the Phase 2 NIH Fast Track grant. It's a smoking cessation app, which is, I'm not allowed to say much more than that, but it will be entering clinical trials in the fall. It's something that's personally near and dear to my heart. Tobacco addiction is a real problem, even though about 15% of the current population in the United States smokes. It's still incredibly damaging. We also have the Science Game Lab project, which I just mentioned, which is with Scripps Research Institute. We're partnering with Nancy Schwartzman, a pretty well-known documentary filmmaker here in New York City, who's affiliated with the Tribeca Film Institute, on a transmedia project. We've done a lot of projects with the American Museum of Natural History in collaboration with them, Pterosaurs, the card game, Killer Snails, which is another project which we're a part of, which is NSF funded, and we've done a lot of work in the area of ADHD and using creative storytelling to address issues around things like ADHD on 2 grants that we've been on. One of the ADHD projects we were part of is also in clinical trials right now. The long game.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you, Margaret. Jesse.
Hey, it's me. Can I steal the clicker?
You can.
All right, I'll just do that then. Yeah, hey, so I'm the CEO of Shell Games. I also teach at Carnegie Mellon University. Shell Games started about 14 years ago. Initially, it was just me doing some consulting, and then I picked up a handful of people because there were some clients who had projects that could use a team, and we've grown the team bit by bit over that time until now we're a little bit north of 100 staff, all located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Initially, we were all about entertainment games, and about 7 years ago, people started coming to us with, some of our clients started coming to us with educational game concepts. And we were interested because we liked the idea of it, and I'd been doing some of that sort of thing at Carnegie Mellon, so I knew a little bit about it, and I really saw that this was a field that was growing. And I kept wondering, why are they coming to us? Why aren't they, you know, we didn't have a lot of experience with it at the time. I had a little experience at the school, and what I was realizing was that our background in entertainment was actually a real help to us in terms of doing games in the educational space, because there are a number of educational game developers that just aren't great at making things fun. And so we realized for us that could be a core strength, that we had some strength and reputation in making things really fun. So we've tried to leverage that best we can. And over the last 7 years, we've moved to the point where we're doing mostly educational and transformational games. I would say we do about 70% of educational games, about 30% of pure entertainment games. We don't want to give up the pure entertainment, partly because we like it, but then again also, it does continue to help us get credibility in the space. So in terms of what's changed for us over the years is partnerships. Initially, you know, we don't have investors. We have done everything through work for hire, has been how we fund our company, and then we take any profits we can make from work for hire and try and invest them in our own IP. For a long time, we would do that straight up with things that we completely owned, that we would completely self-publish, and we weren't really getting a lot of traction with those things. Recently, we've started to do IP that we are funding and then getting involved with partners. So a great example, we'd been working with the Fred Rogers Company for quite some time, doing work for hire, doing their Daniel Tiger games. And those were mostly on the web, and we went to them and said, we'd love to do an app with you guys. And they said, well, we're not really funding apps right now. And we said, well, we've got an idea for an app. What if we funded it? And then we ended up doing some profit sharing on this. And so we did this stop and go potty game. And how did we get there? We got there because we asked them, what's the most popular episode of the TV show? Because they know that because the episodes are downloaded. And they said, oh, it's the potty training episode. And we started talking to parents and said, what would you pay for an app that had Daniel Tiger that would get your kid to use the potty? And they would say, I would pay any amount of money. So we thought, well, maybe that's a good business model. But it's not something we could have done on our own because it involved the licensing. Another example is Happy Atoms. This was an invention that I had come up with, a new way of kind of having people intuitively do chemistry. It's these physical toys that snap together with magnets that make atoms into molecules, and anybody, even somebody very young, can figure out which atoms form into which molecules. So just through play, you can learn molecular structure. But then we have an app with it. You can figure out what is the molecule I just built. You point the app at it, does an optical scan, and then it can detect up to 12,000 molecules. And we play a kind of a Pokemon-style gotta-catch-em-all game to see how many different molecules you can build. So we invented this and got some IES funding, which was really great. It really helped us kind of move forward on the research. But in terms of actually making the toy, this is a big deal. It's got magnets and plastics and rubber. We ended up meeting with Thames and Cosmos, which is the world's largest producer of science kits. They were really interested, so we teamed up on this, and this has very much been a partnership. And again, this has worked really well. We're finding partnerships are helping us magnify the impact of our own IP. So we're starting an Indiegogo campaign on Tuesday. Anybody who's interested, please go to happyatoms.com and check that out. We'd love your support. Other things, we've started getting really into virtual reality. We've tended to stay very cutting edge technology-wise because anytime new technology comes out, it's an opportunity for us as an independent studio to maybe really make a splash. And so I'd had some experience in the virtual reality space. We started leading with entertainment product. We've had a lot of success with the prototypes of our I Expect You to Die game, and that's going to come out for launch on the Oculus Touch, and we have high hopes for that. But at the same time, we've also produced Water Bears VR, which is a systems thinking VR game for the Vive that is currently out now on Steam, because really as we're excited about VR for entertainment, but really I look at VR for education as something that is going to, I think, be very powerful and potentially disruptive in the educational space. So there you go. So those have been some of our strategies.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
Hey, that's me.
And it's Dan.
Oh, so I should hand it down to Dan here. Is that right?
He's going to be all right.
All right, he's good.
Yeah, I went minimalist with my slides this time. So there's my slide. That's it. So Filament Games, yeah. So we've been around for about 11 years. We have about 40 employees. We're located in the Midwest of all places. And we use the power of play to try to improve people's lives. And the vast majority of the time, this takes the form of creating educational games that change behaviors or change perspectives or give people skills that they didn't previously have. And this has been really fascinating work over the years. And the main way that our studio has evolved is that we now have two business units. One is a work-for-hire studio where we do contract work and build custom games for people. The thing that's been cool to see change over the years is just that our client base has gotten increasingly eclectic. So in the beginning, we worked mostly with mission-driven not-for-profits, academic researchers. Now it really runs the gamut. There's VC-funded startups, there's big publishers, you name it. All sorts of different age groups, all sorts of different subject areas, so it's been really cool to see how that's evolved. The other business unit within Filament is more of a startup. It's more like 2 to 3 years old, and that's where we publish our own learning game content specifically into the K-12 market. We have a library of learning games across different subject areas and across different grades, and those are partnered with some curriculum materials, some professional development courses, and dashboards that report out on what the students are doing in the games. And our tactic for selling those is we go kind of old school, just direct sales to schools and districts, and we sell site licenses. More recently, we've also started bringing on third-party content that aligns with our vision for what good learning games do and can be. Now the next thing is what's sort of been going on the last couple of years. What have we learned? Next slide, Mark. Oh, that's right. It's just this one. A couple interesting things have happened. One is on the publishing side of the business, and we've actually started to see some sales. Like actual schools and districts have started buying video games that teach from us. And if you would have talked to me 2 to 3 years ago, I would have said that I wasn't sure whether or not that would ever be possible. At this point, I'm quite sure it's possible. It just takes a long time. And so I'm more confident than ever in this vision that somewhere around 5 years from now, 10 years from now, games will be very commonplace in the classroom, whether it's, now I refer to them as old school, like regular games that you play on a computer screen or virtual reality or mixed reality. But basically, we've started to see some real success. We've started to see some real traction in schools. And really, I mainly just attribute that to the patience that we've had. You know, if I were to sort of go back in time and talk to myself at the beginning of that journey and try to explain how long it was going to take, I would have said it would take a very long time, and past Dan would have been like, oh, okay, you know, I get it. And I'd be like, no, you don't get it. Like, we're talking, you're thinking like human years, I'm talking geological time. Like, it takes a long time. So we're certainly nowhere close to having crossed any kind of finish line, but we can see that trajectory towards sustainability, and I think that's a really good thing for this space. One of the other things that we saw last year on the work for hire side that I think is interesting is we started to see some large, sort of like large money organizations enter the Games for Change space, the education space. Probably the most notable one is Amplify. The good news about that is that some other people other than the people on this stage, probably with more MBAs and a lot more business experience, think that there may be money to be made in the educational game space. And that's really exciting for us. Some of them just sort of poked and retreated, but some of them, like Amplify, jumped in feet first. Looking forward, I think the thing that I'm most excited about, and this is kind of on the publishing side of the business, the thing that I'm most excited about is winning this battle between real games and quiz games. So there was an interesting, and I totally think that we can. So there, Joan Gans-Cooney put out a report a little while back that showed that the vast majority of teachers, it was something like 3/4 of K-8 teachers, were using video games in the classroom. And of course I got really excited until I read a couple of paragraphs down that they were not real games that they were using. So it said it more tactfully. It was like of the immersive long form variety with, you know, that teach complex skills in 21st century learning, et cetera. But like good games, right? Like real games. And so part of the challenge that we have as a company that's trying to sell games to school is really a literacy battle. We're trying to convince people, like, yes, the practice stuff is fine, but can we please just not call those games? Please, like, let's not call those video games. Can we put those in a bucket over here? And I'm trying to sell you something totally different. And the cool thing is, ThinkZone, I don't know if David Langendon's in the audience, but ThinkZone did a report recently that basically corroborated this idea that if you ask schools and teachers what they think video games are good for, they'll tell you that it's teaching complex skills and teaching 21st century skills. So we're all on the same page. But obviously there's this disconnect between the aspiration of what games can be used for and the reality that's taking place in most classrooms right now. So a big part of our goals for the next 5 or so years is to try to narrow that gap or eliminate that disparity between aspiration and practice.
Thank you, Dan. Hey, Dan, I'm going to ask you a question that's unrelated to anything you just talked about. What's the sign say next to you? The number.
Oh, the timing thing?
23.
Oh, is that a bomb ticking down? We all have 23 minutes to live.
Thank you. I have a commitment to staying on time, and this will help. Thank you. Well, thank you for all the great comments about your companies. I feel like we've got a really veteran audience here, so talking about starting up a studio is not something we really need to do, but I do have some questions for you. And it would be great to have a conversation, so if you want to talk to each other, and that's totally great. And then we'll split the time. So we've got about 23 minutes. We'll split it in half. We'll talk for 10, 12, and then we'll switch it over and get questions from you. So think about some questions. I realize I neglected to kind of tell you my background of why I'm sitting here. So I think like Jesse, came from VR way back in the day. Spent 4 years doing VR research, and then I got into games by way of 3D and Nintendo 64. Spent 5 years at Nintendo and 5 years at Sony, and eventually spent 2013 and 2014 at the White House. And at the White House, I got the ability to focus on things I was really passionate about, that being games for education and computer science education. So while I was there, to get to a question, I was really excited to see these huge investments that Dan was just talking about. So, I mean, Amplify, this is like a $500 million play, right? Glass Lab was pretty impressive. 3 years, 5 million MacArthur, 5 million Gates, if I remember correctly. That was huge. And then CoLab propped up. CoLab's sort of a games for education incubator based at Zynga in San Francisco. And the thing I want to say about all three of those is that none of those are now in the same form that they were. So Amplify's pivoting. Glass Lab's pivoted to LRNG, and CoLab, they just announced that they're going to shut down after their 5th cohort. So I'm feeling a little depressed on that front. But you guys are doing amazing work, and there's so much good stuff coming out. So what I'm curious is, what do you know that these people need to know to make their businesses successful? Like, maybe you can each think of a story or some big problem that you've faced and the solution that you've come across that's helped you. As maybe an example, we talked about distribution a lot. So if that's an area you wanted to talk about, that seems like a hot button. Who wants to jump in?
I kind of do, but I don't know if I should say this. I'm going to go ahead and say it. So okay. So I was just talking with somebody earlier today about that really big math MMO that we all learned about at GLS this past year that had like millions and millions of, can somebody help me out? It's had the word red in the title, I think. Nobody else knows about this? Yeah, John Romero's thing, thank you. Does anybody know the dollar figure for that? It was a lot. Thank you, you should be up here. So basically, I think that when you have a lot of permission to play with really big dollars, it's easy to get yourself into trouble. And so, one of our secrets at Filament over the years is just to kind of be scrappy, and it keeps us hungry. We stay focused on sort of the most mission-critical things and being iterative and experimenting and not making too big of an investment in any particular place until we know that something's going to work. So I guess I would just say I think there are advantages to having less money, if that makes sense.
All of your investors are really happy right now.
Yes, we have no investors. That's why I can say what I want.
Yeah, and I'd follow that up with just saying that, yeah, taking a lean startup model with any of these things, because if you weren't starry-eyed, you wouldn't be in this business, right? If you were just all about the dollars, you'd go into another business. You're in this business because you have big dreams of changing the world. But don't let those big dreams blind you to the financial realities. You need tangible proof about what people actually want. One of the things we've started doing is doing Kickstarters for things, just to prove out, do people really want this? We think it's a good idea, but do they want it? And we've had some we've kickstarted, and it's been, yep, people want this. Good, make it. We've had other ones. We did a game last year. We kickstarted. We didn't even get, I don't think we got 7% of what we tried to get. And that could be depressing, but for me, I was like, I just saved $1 million because I'm that smart. Now we can take our funds and put them on something that people actually want. So anything you can do to prove that people really want it is a good idea.
I think what Margaret was saying too about the long haul and looking at where the business opportunity is. Maybe that is being hungry enough that you're keeping your eye out. But I think a lot of buzz in the last couple of years has gone around about how big the educational market is and how many millions of dollars there are from state funding and national funding. And but if you talk to teachers or schools and look at how things that get used year after year get adopted, it may be the first year that kids are playing it. The second year that a teacher sees that the kids are playing it and figures out, here's where I can fit it into my class. The third year before that teacher has used it well enough that a couple of their colleagues have caught on, and they make the case to the school, which then puts it into the next budget cycle. And that's, if you're expecting on the commercial game industry model to make most of your profit in 6 to 8 to 9 months, you're going to be very disappointed with that adoption cycle. But if you are looking at, if you're proving out something that people need, and you're keeping it light and you're watching for where the demand is rather than where you think it is, then you can stick around long enough that the word of mouth spreads and that you become trusted.
I have two quick anecdotes that I was inspired by, given all the things you guys said, that I think might be useful for this audience. One is specific to Playmatics. So before I got into the games, I was finishing up my master's thesis. I was a temp, and I ended up working at the Department of Public Health. And then 4 months later, I was a program manager for tobacco cessation programs. Ironic, never thought it would come in handy. But what I know, right? But now I'm working on a game that's going to be in clinical trials. And what I found is when we speak with researchers and scientists, they are hungry to collaborate with people like us because we not only can apply design thinking to their research goals or their educational goals, but a lot of us have the understanding about the ins and outs of commercialization, and increasingly, given where the game industry is going, internationalization. If you look at the entertainment realm of the game industry right now, many eyes are focused on China because they look at the numbers of the penetration of smartphones, and it just blows North America out of the water, so to speak, euphemistically speaking. And then on a more sort of nuts and bolts thing, if you are doing work for hire agreements, not to get too much into the business aspect of it, one traditional structure I've seen for paying developers, or I prefer to call us content creators because I think it's a little more elevating, is milestone based. So, okay, for your alpha, you'll get this much, and for your beta. And what inevitably happens when you structure payments like that is if you don't have an incredibly well-written contract with an incredibly well-written approval process and cycles, you can get really bogged down where you might be working with someone on the other side of the table, and even though they're well-intentioned, and they might say, "You're missing this icon. That isn't beta. We're gonna withhold payment until you get that icon." Something stupid. And so what Playmatics has done, and we do it across the board, when we do work for hire arrangements, we break down payments. As much upfront as we can possibly get, preferably 100%. But then we break down the payments on a monthly basis. And so really that makes everyone have the same amount of skin in the game. If they're going to keep feature creeping or not knowing what they want or not listening to the experts that they've hired to help guide them, and out of the goodness of their hearts, of course, you're not going to lose staff, you're not going to lose money, you're not going to be assuming all the risk as a content creator when you're co-creating these products. And then there's all the other stuff about making sure you build in upside at the back end when things launch as much as you can. You have more leverage than you realize. It's just a matter of knowing where that leverage is.
It's interesting for me to hear you talk about the sort of financing models for your studios, because it does seem so different from the B tier of entertainment game studios that we had for a number of years who were doing licensed work as a way to mitigate their risk. So you've talked about front loading on work for hire as being a way you can keep the money flowing and keep things going. You mentioned that maybe it might take 3 years for you to see good returns on your investment. How many of you have taken grants, government grants, NIH and NSF, grants?
Both hands.
Yeah. Grants have been kind of a new thing for us. We only maybe the last 3 years ago did we start to get aggressive into the grant space, but it's worked out. Now, there's no way we could completely subsist on grants. I think I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 10% funded by grants. But, it's one of these things where every little bit helps, and having diverse funding sources really helps with longevity, because if you just have one funding source and it goes a little south, you've got trouble. You got all your eggs in one basket and you got trouble. And we've really found diversity of projects, diversity of funding sources, if you care about longevity, is a strength.
Yeah, the best thing about the grants from my perspective, other than that there's no equity stake involved, is it's the most patient money you can possibly find out there. And to Scott's point, if you're going for the education business, you've got to have very, very patient money. So, Ed Metz is maybe in the audience someplace. He hasn't heckled me at all about our revenue numbers yet.
Yeah, hey, Ed, if you're here, Ed, put up your hand so everybody can try to get money from you. Yeah. Anybody who's giving away money, could you raise your hand?
But one of the things you really got to be aware about, I think a lot of people go into it kind of naively when it comes to grants. You're going to apply And just doing the application, that's going to take you months of work. And then you're going to have to wait, months, like 6 months maybe, to. That's excellent. I'm going to hold you to that, sir. You're going to wait 90 days or sometimes even more before you get an answer, and the answer might be no. And then if the answer is yes, you get funding for a period of time, but then you might want to go for phase 2. Well, there's going to be a long gap with that. And if the grants are your only method of funding, boy, you're going to have trouble. So grants are. Grants are a good sometimes food, but if it's all that you could have a little trouble.
And to build off of that too, the grant is, and you're kind of making this point, the grant is the beginning of the investment. Yeah. And once you get that grant, you now have a liability to take that product to market, and a whole bunch of your costs are going to lie on the marketing and sales side. So you'll probably end up spending more of your own internal dollars or getting dollars from someplace else in order to actually take that thing through to completion.
And following on that with the idea of the partnership and exploring innovative partnerships that I was mentioning earlier, we haven't taken grants to build what we've done. We're internally funded. But we have helped a lot of other folks with theirs. So a lot of grants are going to ask you, so once this thing is made, how are you getting it out to people? Or how are you going to make money off of it to keep it around? And so we have helped write and support and say, we may be one channel depending on how the project turns out. And here are some things that we could advise that make it more likely that this project will survive past its release date.
It's great. I'm watching the clock closely and realizing we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to poll the wisdom of the audience, because I always think it's better to get questions from you guys. So if you have burning questions, please raise your hand. If you don't, I'll ask more questions. I know you've got questions. In the corner.
It's not really a question as it is more of a comment, and I have to say that I was really happy to hear you say that you don't follow the blame, because I feel like there's so many, I work at a university, like a lot of us do, and I feel like there's so many of these ed tech startups that do nothing but follow the blame because they're from business, and they just like to tell us because they have an MBA, which I do have, by the way, and I work at a university. Do I have 9-year-old computers in the classroom?
Yeah, do you guys...
What do I have in the classroom that I have to run the computer games?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one book, anybody who's making and trying to get into doing the business of educational games, everyone should read the book, The Wide Lens. It's a business book all about how what makes innovations often succeed or fail is the environment ready? And looking not just at the strength of your innovation and your invention, but how does it fit into the world? And it's full of great case studies about times the world has been ready and when it hasn't, and how you can make the world ready. It's very, I think it's very enlightening.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's really, but it is about digital divide and the digital use divide, which I thought was an interesting conversation earlier. Thanks for your question. Other questions?
Mark, there's one over there.
Thank you. Dun, 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 dun. Great question. So I'm going to repeat the question. What do we think about in-classroom versus out-of-classroom games? We love games.
They're both good. They're both different.
I like them both.
Okay. What do you prefer to build?
Yeah, I think obviously when we design for the classroom, we're taking in certain considerations into account that we don't if we're designing a game for informal use. The main thing is time, right? And then, of course, the question is this meant to be played in the classroom, or is this meant to be played outside of the classroom as homework or an assignment like that? Most of the time, we're designing for classroom use, and it's a surprisingly small amount of time, particularly given just the logistics of getting everybody to the computer lab or doling out the laptops or what have you. So what we've started to advocate for in our professional development courses is don't expect to play the entire game in a single sitting. It's really important that all the games have a save state so that the students can, in a login, so the students can experience part of it and then come back. Or maybe the teacher just wants to jump to a particular level, et cetera. So that's another type of consideration is, in the beginning we had locked progressions, and then we realized, well, what if the teacher wants to go to level 30 because that's a particular thing that he or she wants to hit on. So there's more constraints, I suppose I would say. I will say the big change in our thinking, and my thinking in particular over the last couple of years, is that from a design perspective, in terms of like what types of gameplay mechanics you use, I don't actually think that there needs to be that big of a gap between, sorry, there's like a whole bunch of stuff moving around on this screen, so I'm just gonna move it back. Squirrel. I don't know what they're doing back there, but it's distracting. So, here, there we go. So basically, from a design perspective, I don't think they have to be all that different. And in fact, I think some of the places where we've gotten ourselves into trouble in the past is we've been too oriented toward, well, we got to nail the standards, we got to hit the thing, hit the content that the teachers wants to hit, and then we'll turn around and see teachers using commercial off-the-shelf games in the classroom. We're like, what the heck? We just bent over backwards to try to make something that was super explicitly designed for the classroom. So I do think there's a balancing point, and obviously we're in a state of transition right now as everybody figures out to what extent the standards are going to influence their teaching practice, but.
Yeah, I think if you want the big challenge, design for out of the classroom and then for in the classroom. So, I mean, a lot of hay is being made out of Minecraft. That was not meant for the classroom, but there are ways to use it, and folks have found ways to adapt it. So I think if you make a game that would be fun to play on its own, can compete with the commercial game market that is the market that kids are in when they're playing at home. But you do those things that let a teacher use it in the classroom, that help them, give them cut points where they know what's going to fit inside of a class period and how to find the game and think about ways to use it. Then you're set up to bridge that divide. Of course, that's also the hardest. That's like the 3-star challenge.
And I also wouldn't, speak against, and something we've explored quite a bit, games that have in-classroom components, out-of-classroom components, and also what we call, ironically, somewhat, real-world components. So whether it's incorporating elements of like live-action role-playing or some kind of real-world interactions, I mean, that's the holy grail in some ways.
Thanks for the question. There's a question here. Yeah, it's a great question. It's so how do you measure success, and do you measure success in terms of change?
Yeah, it's different. Different games are different, and you measure it differently with different games. Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you're measuring actual change. Like we worked on the Play Forward game with Yale Medical, and that's a game designed to change the sexual behaviors of teenagers, and we're looking at them over, like it's a multi-year study with multiple surveys looking at have their habits actually changed, and then ultimately, have the disease rates actually changed. But then other times you look at things that are completely different. I don't know, you guys have any good stories?
Yeah, I mean, our smoking cessation game is pretty straightforward. We're entering it into a clinical trial. We have very specific criteria around quit rates, duration of quit rates. So that's very straightforward. It gets much fuzzier when you're doing more educational assessments. Same thing with the ADHD. We measure brain patterns and brain waves before and after and over time. So it's a little more straightforward. Not necessarily as indicative of what it really means in some ways, because things are always up to interpretation, especially with neuroscience.
I think, so in academia around education and games for change, there's an idea of embedded assessment, which is that you can't move on in the game until you have mastered a certain skill, because it's just required to continue in the game. With games that are designed like that, and many are not, how long or how far someone has played the game can serve as a very effective measure of change. I'm currently playing a gamified to-do list app called Habitica. And if someone's played that for more than about probably 3 weeks, and you can look at the kinds of, you could I don't have access to the back end. But you could look at the kinds of tasks that they've done and the way that they've completed them and whether they're marking easy and hard and setting good challenges for themselves and all of that. You can just see the change right in there. But the fact that they've played it for that long is going to be pretty effective because they can't use it ineffectively for that long.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question, and you're really close, so it's you. Yeah, the question is about launch strategies, especially for games that are competitive with entertainment games.
You got to be clever. You got to, because you don't have a ton of money to get this thing out, so you've got to do any damn thing that you can to get it out there, because busting through the noise is absolutely the hardest thing. So crowdfunding campaigns and just finding ways to be viral. Pick a game topic that you know can work. Find a marketing partner. It's just, there's no one answer. It's whatever clever, scrappy thing you can come up with.
I would not underestimate the power of. I would not underestimate the power of the beep. No, I would not underestimate the power of YouTube influencers for certain audiences and genres.
All right, that was the sign that I need to go to the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we'll end. So I always like to leave people with homework. So we've got a book recommendation. What was the book again?
Yeah, the book's called The Wide Lens. I apologize. I can't think of the author off the top of my head, but I would recommend that.
Okay, The Wide Lens. So the question I have for you all is, what games are you playing that you would recommend? And I'll kick it off. So I'm playing Minecraft Story Mode, which I finally got around to. And computer science education games, I've been playing this game called TIS 100, which is, to call it a game is kind of a stretch. It's more of a debugger, but highly recommended.
We've got a number of games coming out on Monday through, and next week through Game Up, but right now the one that I just mentioned, Habitica, I think is an oddball in the conversation for Games for Change, but it's effective. I'm really enjoying it.
I just checked out Lila, Shadows of War. I don't know if people have seen that, but it's a game about issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I think it's a really interesting exemplar of ways to use a single path storyline in order to prove that certain things in the world are difficult. Anyway, it's worth checking out. And what makes it especially interesting, you can find it on Android. iOS said, nope, too topical, we're banning it. So I found that kind of interesting.
Mobile last. I've been really into Hearthstone, and which is not necessarily relevant, and also not necessarily relevant. I've been really into the Telltale games, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones. So yeah, there you have it.
The Counting Kingdoms.
That's great. Let's thank our panelists.